Welcome to the first episode of the Latin American Cultural Center podcast. We bring you a pleasant conversation in the voices of Ali and La Violeta about the book Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano, a text that draws very well the yesterday and today of Latin American reality. Let's get started.
We're really digging deep this time, huh? Eduardo Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America. Dense, but man, important. If you want to even start to get a grip on, well, a lot of things, actually.
It's one of those books that feels, unfortunately, more relevant every year. Galeano really captures, it's almost like he paints it, this stark picture of how resource extraction really shaped Latin America, the economics, the social structures, everything.
And that's what we're getting at with this deep dive, right? This whole resource curse idea. How can a region overflowing with resources, silver, oil, rubber, you name it, how can it still struggle?
It's a head-scratcher, isn't it? You'd think. But here's the thing, right? From the get-go, from Columbus onward, the Americas were seen as this source of wealth. But that wealth, not for the people living there. The whole thing, the system, it was built to extract, export, ship those riches off to build up Europe.
And that pattern, it's like this echo, right? Independence comes along, but it's not a clean break, is it?
Not even close. Sure, the faces change, the flags change, but the tune's the same. 16th century, it's silver. 19th century, it's rubber. But that control, who benefits, who calls the shots, that stays the same. Eerily consistent.
So are we saying it's more complicated than, colonizers bad, everyone else good?
Way more nuanced.
Yeah.
And Galeano, he gets that. He pushes us past those easy answers. Local elites in bed with foreign powers.
Yes.
It's tangled, right? Power dynamics, global market. That's the web we're going to untangle.
Let's get tangled. Galeano starts with Potosi, right? The silver mines, brutal. He throws out a number, 8 million indigenous deaths. Just how is that even possible?
It's almost unfathomable. The Mita system forced labor, basically worked people to death. And it wasn't some accident. It was the system.
And all that silver, I'm guessing it wasn't building schools in Bolivia, right? Where was it going?
You guessed it. Straight into the resource curse textbook. Spain gets rich, the average Bolivian. Not so much. In fact, Galeano argues that silver directly led to the latifundio system. Huge estates, controlled by a handful of families, producing for export, not local needs. Inequality baked right in from the jump.
So while Spain's booming, they're creating this system designed to funnel it all to the top.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting, this pattern. It's a repeat offender. From the mines of Potosi, Galeano takes us to the plantations. Brazil, the Caribbean, sugar. White gold, they called it. Next, boom.
Fueled, of course, by the slave trade. Horrific. Millions upon millions of lives just gone, shipped across the ocean in unimaginable conditions. All for sugar.
And the land itself.
Yeah.
Trashed. They weren't just growing sugar, they were mining the land, leaving scars that are still there centuries later.
Silver, then sugar. Okay, I'm seeing a theme here. A boom, and everyone benefits except the people and the land the resource came from.
Tragically, yes. And each boom, it's like it locked them in tighter. Dependent on exporting whatever the hot commodity was, vulnerable to every swing of the global market, every whim of the global powers.
Which brings us to rubber. Now, even knowing how this story usually goes, Henry Wickham and the Amazon rubber boom, that's, wild.
You think. It's almost unbelievable. This guy, Wickham, British explorer, manages to smuggle out, get this, 70,000 rubber tree seeds.
70,000, how?
$1 million question. Those seeds end up in British colonies in Asia.
Right.
Cultivation on a massive scale. And bam, Brazil's monopoly. Gone. Poof. Overnight.
Decades of dominance, all because someone got really good at seed smuggling.
Talk about fragility. And for the indigenous communities who depended on rubber tapping,
Yeah.
disaster. Utter disaster.
The resource curse strikes again. Galeano also talks about coffee in Central America. Same song, different crop.
Sadly, yeah. Coffee plantations pop up, a lot of times on land, just taken from indigenous communities. Same issues, different packaging, awful working conditions, foreign companies calling the shots, United Fruit Company, anyone. The term banana republic comes from this, by the way.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, not a compliment.
Not even a little bit. It's a country totally at the mercy of one single export. And who's in control? Foreign companies, local elites? Same story, different century.
So we're seeing the connections, this resource extraction, economies that can't diversify, the inequality, foreign powers pulling strings. It all ties together, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's within that whole mess that countries are trying to break free. Galeano points to some really interesting cases, particularly Paraguay, under Francia and the Lopez dynasties. They gave it a real shot, tried to do things differently.
And how'd that go for them?
At first, surprisingly well. They push industrialization, education becomes a priority, no taking the easy way out with foreign loans. For a while there, it looked like they might actually escape the curse. But then, the War of the Triple Alliance. They get caught in the middle, and, well, it's not pretty.
Spoiler alert, not good for Paraguay.
Heartbreaking, actually. And it shows you it's not just about wanting to be independent, right? Regional power, how that gets used to keep everyone in line. That's a whole other layer of complexity. Yeah, it really makes you think, like, how is any country supposed to break free, right? But it wasn't just brute force. Galeano, he gets into, like, the money side of it. How these countries got trapped financially, too.
The old friendly loan that turns out to be not so friendly. History's full of those, right? Suez Canal, anyone.
Exactly. And Galeano traces that pattern in Latin America, too. British loans, especially in the 19th century. But they weren't just handing out cash, were they? There were strings, usually tied to infrastructure, railroads specifically.
Railroads, though. On paper, that sounds good, right? Connecting a country, boosting trade, what's the problem?
Sure, in theory, railroads can be great. But Galeano, his argument, right, is that these weren't built for that. They were built for the investors, for the whole export model we've been talking about. So picture this. Instead of linking up within a country, connecting regions, these railroads are like pipelines, funneling raw materials out to the ports, straight to Europe.
So even the physical infrastructure was set up to keep these economies churning out raw materials, feeding the beast, so to speak.
It's kind of perfect, right? In a messed up way, of course. Shows you how deep this all went. And then, well, we hit the 20th century and there's a new player on the field, United States.
Because empires, they got to share eventually, or at least pass the baton of economic dominance. What's Galeano's take on the U.S. entering the picture?
Oh, he doesn't hold back. He calls out this hypocrisy, right? The U.S., all about open markets, free trade, in Latin America, of course. While back home, they're playing by a whole different set of rules, protecting their own industries.
Do as I say, not as I do. Classic. Seems to be in the Empire Handbook, right? Page 1.
Right. Never gets old. And even when some Latin American countries tried to shift, diversify a bit, import substitution, industrialization, big words, but basically trying to make stuff themselves instead of importing it all, the U.S. didn't always love that.
We're talking Perón in Argentina, Goulart in Brazil, right? Trying to chart their own course, and suddenly, boom, U.S.-backed coup.
Exactly. Makes you think, it's not just economics, it's politics. Control the money, control the power. And sure, we might not see as many coups these days, but that underlying dynamic, still there, just sneakier maybe.
Which brings us to today. Galeano's writing about the past, but wants us to connect the dots, right? See how this all plays out in the 21st century. What's different? What's still the same?
Well, he'd say a lot's still the same, unfortunately. Foreign companies, still running the show in a lot of key industries. Mining, agriculture, even the newer stuff, tech. And even when there is tech transfer, knowledge sharing, it often creates new dependencies. Reliance on foreign expertise, equipment, the whole shebang. And then there's trade. Those policies, still often rigged against Latin American economies.
So the remix maybe, same song, just, updated for a new generation, globalization, interconnectedness, all that jazz, but same old story underneath.
That's Galeano's argument, and he's got this stat. It's really eye-opening. He says, think about all the foreign companies operating in Latin America, right?
Right.
A huge chunk of their profits, they don't stay local. They get funneled right back to those home countries.
So even with a physical presence employing local workers, it's still extraction, dependency, wearing a new suit.
Powerful image, isn't it? And it forces us to ask, can these nations ever truly break free? Can they build something different? Something that puts their own development, their own people first?
$1 million question. Galeano thinks it's possible, but he's not naive about it. He wants us to really grapple with it. What would true independence, true development even look like in our world today?
It's messy, right? Requires thinking outside those boxes we're used to. Galeano gives us a starting point, But the conversation definitely doesn't end there.
And that's where it gets tricky, right? It's not like you can just, I don't know, kick out every foreign company, build a wall around your economy and call it a day. It's got to be more than that.
Galeano's point is development. It has to deal with the inequality that's already there, baked in. It can't just be about economics. It's got to be about justice, too.
So what's that look like? He talks about land reform. Is that basically like empowering the people who've gotten the short end of the stick this whole time?
Exactly. Give people a stake. And it's more than that, right? Education, healthcare, infrastructure that actually serves them, not just the export machine. Diversifying, so you're not stuck with one crop, one mineral.
Sounds like he's saying it's about taking control, too. Instead of reacting to whatever the global market wants, you decide what success means for you.
It's like, yeah, history matters. Colonialism, dependency, all that leaves its mark. But it's not the whole story. Latin America can write its own future.
Which brings us back to that question, right? What would a new course even look like in our world? Concretely, what can these nations do?
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all, right? Every country's got its own thing going on. But Galeano, he's got ideas. Regional cooperation's a big one. Latin American countries working together, trade that's actually fair, sharing knowledge, technology, presenting a united front.
To strengthen numbers.
Exactly. And he wants us to think bigger, too. Not just capitalism, not just the Soviet model, but something else. Something that puts people, the planet, on equal footing with profits.
So big systemic stuff. But was there anything, like, smaller scale that gave him hope?
Oh, absolutely. He loved grassroots movements. People, everyday people, demanding change. Indigenous communities fighting for their land, their cultures. Workers fighting for fair treatment. That's where he saw the real energy.
So yeah, policy matters, but it's about shifting power, giving it back to the people who've been denied it for, well, centuries.
That's the heart of it, I think. It's not easy, not fast. But Galeano's message, it's hopeful, right? We understand the history, we see the patterns, and we say no more. We can build something different.
A future where Latin America's wealth actually benefits Latin America.
Exactly, and that's a future worth fighting for.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Eduardo Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America. Heavy stuff, no doubt. But if you want to understand the challenges, the possibilities facing Latin America today, it's essential reading.
And remember, that story's still being written. The ending, it's up to all of us.
So keep those questions Galeano raises close. How can we build a more just, a more equitable future? How do we break those cycles of dependency? Keep thinking, keep exploring. Until next time.
We hope that this episode leaves you with more questions and reflections, and that we can continue unraveling realities in future episodes. We said goodbye from the Latin American Cultural Centre of Toronto at 1756 Eglinton Avenue West. We leave you with a song by Ali Primera, Let's Go People of My Earth. Let's fight for a better world. Until next time.
Pescador que te paras, somnoliento frente al mar, con la desesperanza en tu corazón, con el rostro curtido por el agua, el viento, la lluvia y el sol. Vamos, gente de mi tierra, vamos, gente de mi tierra, vamos, gente de mi tierra. Estudiante que llevas en el pecho un gran corazón, tu patria Venezuela espera. nación.